Good afternoon. I am Elizabeth Alexander, president of the Mellon Foundation. We are so excited to have so many people tuning in today from so many different places. So hello to all of you who are listening and who are typing in the chat. People are representing in this chat. They are writing in from Albuquerque, New Mexico, from West Philadelphia, from Washington, D.C., birthplace of Edward Kennedy, Duke Ellington, from Wellington, New Zealand, from where else? Amsterdam, from the French Quarter in New Orleans. People are, hello from Wally's Jazz Cafe, Boston, Massachusetts. I'm trying to get everybody's home places on here. We had a Portland person out there too. So it is absolutely wonderful to see you all beginning this conversation in the chat. And I'd like to note that there is live ASL interpretation and captioning available for today's program. So you can email events@mellon.org if you would like a link to watch the ASL interpretation stream. And regardless of how you are participating, I invite all of you to continue telling us where you're watching from. And as the conversation continues, to share your questions with us. It is just beautiful to see you out there. And also to see the connections and the exchanges. Someone identified themselves to someone else as someone's cousin. So we see that happening too, that happened in the chats during our Mellon events. And so to this afternoon's conversation, American jazz, American culture. American jazz and its histories, innovations, and influences are deeply embedded in our American society. Jazz is the most significant original American art form, with a history dating back to at least the American Civil War, when enslaved and free Black people gave voice to the complex rhythms, minute tonal inflections, and call and response form that would characterize the genre now known as the blues. Those blues origins, mixed with ragtime and other developments of French-speaking Black Creole music in New Orleans, later fusing with cultures and traditions from all around the world, generated the pioneering musical styles that are constitutive of this thing called jazz. From swing and bebop, from Afro-Latin jazz to bossa nova, from free jazz to jazz fusion, all laying the groundwork for the rhythmic and lyrical innovations of hip hop and rap, American jazz is integral to the soundscape of American life. In its expressivity, in its sheer originality, its highly nuanced virtuosic techniques and practices, it's a tradition that carries the histories and truths of our shared American experience, and one that will continue to inspire new visions for our collective future. So, here today to discuss the dynamic interplay of American jazz and American culture is our all-star panel. I have been looking forward to this for a very long time, and let me introduce them. Farah Jasmine Griffin is an internationally recognized scholar and professor of English and African American Studies at Columbia University, where she is founding chair of the African American Studies PhD department and serves on faculty, as well as being part of the Center for Jazz Studies. Her countless writings and many books range from literary criticism, feminist history, personal memoir. Her recent book, In Search of a Beautiful Freedom, was recognized by the Jazz Journalists Association as a 2024 Jazz Book of the Year. Welcome, Dr. Farah Jasmine Griffin.
Thank you.
So Esperanza. Glad to be here. Oh, so happy you're here. Esperanza Spalding, bassist, justice advocate, former Harvard professor, queen of Portland, Oregon, has written and recorded in 4 different languages across a wide range of musical styles, is always representing for tradition. You saw her most recently at the Grammys, making sure that the great Milton Nascimento was properly acknowledged in that space. She is the first jazz artist to win a Grammy Award for Best New Artist in any category. And among her recent projects, Esperanza co-produced and wrote the libretto for Iphigenia, the opera that would become the final masterwork of the great and beloved Wayne Shorter. Welcome, Esperanza.
Wow.
You look like you're at a recording studio.
I am. Yeah. I'm taking a break.
That's perfect.
To be able to talk. Yes.
Perfect. And Terri Lyne Carrington is a multidisciplinary, there you are, drummer, band leader, producer, educator, as well as founder and artistic director of the Berklee College of Music Institute of Jazz and Gender Justice. Her musicianship and advocacy have earned her an NEA Jazz Masters Fellowship, a Guggenheim Fellowship, 6 Grammy nominations, 4 Grammy Awards. Welcome, Terri Lyne Carrington.
Thank you. Maybe you're putting something into the atmosphere. I don't have a Guggenheim, but that would be nice.
Oh, well, you know what? I just gave you one, girl. So there you go.
Thank you.
So welcome, and we have so much to talk about today. So this is going to be a bebop conversation where we are going to move through and around and all over because there is so much I'm eager to discuss with you. So to begin, let's start with just an improvisational exercise. Jazz means many things: a genre, a style, a sensibility, a culture, a history, a tradition, a way of being. You know, my late father used to talk about, use that word jazzbo, which could also mean a way of behaving for a young child feeling herself. Okay, there you go, jazzbo. It is a noun, it is a verb. So I'd like to, from each of you, starting with Esperanza, with the word jazz, tell me some things that come to mind.
I think of taking insurmountable circumstances and change and whatever detritus is being thrown at you as scraps from the culture or from your socio-political environment, your surroundings, your palette of opportunities, and making the most beautiful way, making sanctuary, employing, drawing forth this profound creative power and force that makes something way more beautiful than any of the options that you don't have access to. And I think about, when we talk about playing the changes, you know, when somebody's really good at playing the changes, I think about that as a metaphor for a time and a place and a people who had to perpetually find beauty and purpose and meaning and logic out of this onslaught of changes that you didn't have control over. And I think of, you know, what is an improvising musician or a comping musician doing? It's this capacity to make sense, beauty, logic, narrative, and express your agency through whatever changes are coming at you.
Thank you so much. Terri Lyne.
I don't know about following that. I mean, she said so much, and everything she said, I agree with. You know, when I think of jazz, there's been a lot of discussion around the word itself. A lot of people don't like the word for, you know, and for many reasons. I do think of it, you know, all of it as just Black music, like Nicholas Payton says, and others. But I think of it as being expansive, you know, not monolithic, and you know, like you said, a way of life. That everything I do is based on my jazz tradition and my jazz training. So I see it in everything. And people have a lot of different names, you know, for it. Duke Ellington said we stopped using that word in 1959 or some year like that. He said jazz is just freedom of expression. And I really love that because it's based in freedom, you know, that it was created and centered around freedom. So I think that, you know, as of course the freedoms in the 60s and even before that, but it's also representative of the freedoms that we're dealing with right now today. So it's very expansive and not limited.
Thank you. Thank you. Farah.
Well, I just would echo everything that my sister said, you know, and I would only add to that. I mean, I agree, creativity and freedom, right? It's just this constant capacity to create and to create something new, to build on what you're given, to honor it, and to create something new, to create new pathways and to open new doors, and to even take something that feels like a mistake and create something beautiful and new and extraordinary out of it, to stand on the past and to create a future where it seems like there is none, constantly
Mm.
being creative and innovative in the moment. So there's just this excitement. And I would also add excellence, just,
Yeah.
kind of achievement of excellence. And not in a way a standardized sense of excellence, but one when you're only competing against yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you are achieving better than you did yesterday. You're just meeting a standard that you set for yourself. And I think that's true in life. Jazz models
Mm-hmm.
for us a way of being in life, creative, free, and aspiring towards something better than you were yesterday.
Mm, mm, mm. Thank you all so much. Farah, if we could stay with you for a minute, can you please talk about jazz as a distinctly American innovation and how, we would talk about jazz as part of American history and American cultural history writ large?
Certainly. I mean, it's a art form that's born in the continental United States, but like everything that is American, it's the world, right? The America is the world, So people, you don't want to be kind of that kind of narrow sense of patriotism, right? That
Mm,
world came to America and peoples of African descent came and brought their tremendous musical traditions and created a number of musical traditions here when they were confronted with the reality of being torn from their various homelands, brought here with a rich, rich tradition of music. And you named all of the different kinds of musics that they gave to the world. And jazz comes out of that meeting and melding with European traditions and European instruments, along with African instruments and sounds and cultures. And then you get a place like New Orleans, which is just this incredible amalgamation of cultures, French on top of Spanish, on top of African, on top of Native American, and the peoples of African descent doing what they do, bringing all those cultures together and not shutting anything out and creating something extraordinary that could only have been created in that time and in that place, and never being stingy with it, like
mm,
just giving it as a gift to the world. So to me, it's not enough to say that it's American. Um,
mm,
it's the best of what America is. It's the best of what America can be. It's the best of what America gives to the world. It's not the little
mm,
narrow, mean-spirited sense of America. It's the
mm,
most
mm,
aspirational sense of what is America and what America has
mm,
to offer.
mm. Beautiful, beautiful. Esperanza, Terri, Lynn, did you want to add anything to that?
Not me, Farah.
I mean, I
She
know how
said a
she said
lot.
it, We all heard it.
A mic drop emoji. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, I love how you said that, Farah, and I also think about the encounters between indigenous peoples, right? Like everything you described is encounters between indigenous peoples, and I think about
Mm,
the encounters and the intermingling and the course socially, politically, cosmologically, physically, the intercourse between the indigenous African peoples and indigenous peoples of these lands. And I think about actually how hard it is to peer through the kind of veil of history of this kind of veil of what was not considered worthy enough to be archived in the way that we currently think of archiving. And I think about how we kind of had to piece together the story through sound. And in that
mm,
documentary Rumble, it's supposed to be about rock and roll, but we know that the origins of rock and roll is Black and brown music, of the Americas.
mhm,
And it really points to these places and spaces in time that there aren't like kind of concrete archives for, where this Black and indigenous, inter-influencing is happening. And I also feel that as the inevitable root of the jazz tree also, right? Just this journey of indigenous peoples who were mutually disenfranchised and all in disenfranchised in different ways, almost finding haven in the exchange of each other's culture and indigenous cosmologies and sounds as different as they may have been, when they first met.
mm, mm,
Beautiful.
mm. Well, and I wonder also if we could take it out to think about, there are jazz travels the globe, right? And exists in epicenters around the globe. We might think of Paris or Port-au-Prince or Lagos or Cape Town or Tangier or, Tehran. I mean, or Tokyo. I mean, there are a lot of different places around the globe where jazz, or as Gwendolyn Brooks would say, where we occur, right?
Mm.
Where we occur. And so, let's talk about that some, about the movement of jazz around the world. And Terri Lyne, if you could talk some about how you think about your music making in the context of place and movement.
Yeah. Well, I mean, jazz, of course, like you said, was a global or is a global phenomenon. And it's interesting because there's so many people that have made their living in all these other places playing the music, and so there's appreciation for that. And on the other hand, the music has changed a lot, and there's, like Farah said, we weren't stingy, with this kind of offering, and I feel like there's like sometimes a conflict with how some of the things that are so important, like you mentioned, the blues and certain rhythmic approaches, when we don't hear them anymore. And so I start to think about, conversations that, are about what is jazz? Is this still jazz? And I really think that, institutionalizing it is a big part of why this has happened. So yes, it is global, but there's also some things sometimes that I believe are foundational to the music that is almost not existent anymore. So when you talk about place and regions and it emerging from this freedom struggle that we had here in the United States, I wonder how much of that needs to still be a part of the music for us to still call it jazz. That's something that I struggle with, with trying to figure out. And then there's so much, so much to it, like coding and decoding, and listening to the lyrics, and even in the music, stuff that's so cultural. That in other cultures, I think they do it in their own way, but it is still some, as I said, something I'm conflicted about. And I think that we have to have these as educators. We have to have these discussions because we make our living often teaching people that aren't really aware at all of the culture of which the music came from. And I think that's problematic. I'm not sure if I really answered your question, but that's
No.
what I was
Yes,
moved
and,
to think
and
of.
I hear something else in what you're saying that I want to ask you all about briefly. Because you all are educators, and when you are teaching jazz or aspects of jazz, what are the moments or the junctures where it becomes hard to talk about, where it becomes contradictory, where there's something that doesn't quite fit the nice story that you're trying to share as teachers?
Contradictory. Well, yeah, for me, as a teacher, you're trying to help everybody as best you can get to their highest level or to their next level. Um, so yeah, it does feel a bit contradictory in that way. And I think at Berklee there's so many international students, and Danilo Perez has a Global Jazz Institute, and I've learned a lot just from that institute of bringing all these different cultures together to play improvised music. So there's creativity and improvisation. But a lot of people, want to claim, playing jazz, and just because you've learned, uh, these Charlie Parker heads or certain standards, and learned a bit how to play around with these chord changes and improvise on them. Yeah, I'm not always sure that that's jazz because there's a deep history and came out, it was born out of struggle. And sometimes, you know, as Wayne Shorter would say, sometimes it just sounds academic. And yeah, so it's like, how do you connect, you know, your humanity with others? How do you, you know, dig to the deepest place inside of you and, you know, play something that could make somebody cry or somebody laugh or, you know, feel all these things. And sometimes, yeah, it's hard in the classroom because I'm not sure they're always connecting to that.
Yeah, I think that I often teach this last semester, I had a few young musicians in a literature class. And we were reading, you know, I've had them in literature classes, I've had them in cultural history classes, and teaching jazz in those contexts. So teaching jazz, but also teaching Sonny's Blues by James Baldwin, or teaching along with an essay, or teaching it in the context of Black studies with writers who have relationships with musicians, with the music, and providing that kind of broad cultural context for a certain form of African American jazz. It doesn't mean that, you know, whoever you are, you can't have access to this music. I mean, you know, all artists want everyone to have access to their art form, but to understand the cultural context out of which it's born. And the deeper you go into the specifics of a context, I think, I mean, Tony K. Bambara says this, the more universal it is. You touch upon the humanity because all people suffer. All people love their children. All people have heartbreaks, right? And so it's in that specific nature that the music comes out of that it also touches people across the world. And so it's not asking people to give up the specificity of their culture that they want to bring to the music. It's how does the specificity of your experience speak to the specificity of, you know, the context out of which this music is born, to appreciate that, to appreciate the context out of which it's born, to understand it. And I think that we ask that of any art form, you know, like opera singers who learn how to sing German lieder understand the culture that German lieder was born out of, right? They are asked to understand that. They aren't expected to perform without understanding context or history, or, you know, what, or the context that produced the Shakespeare. You have to understand the context that produced the Shakespeare in order to perform a Shakespeare.
Well,
Yeah,
and
also I
let's
think, like, you know, go
please.
ahead.
No,
Well, I was
please,
just going to
please, please.
say yeah, the freedom part of it is, you know, if it was born, you know, also out of this desire for freedom, um, and people aren't really dealing with that in the same way. I mean, we have to all obviously we have to shift our thinking too, and deal with the issues that people are dealing with
Right.
now. It's just that, you know, sometimes, you know, I feel like it's an exercise, and it's, you know, not paying attention to the reason that it happened in the first place, and how that reason, you know, I guess I'm pretty much reiterating what you said, but that how that reason can relate to their reason. So I don't always hear. Maybe I'm, you know, becoming jaded, you know, after, you know, because I'm speaking of performance classes. You know, we don't have a lot of there's a lot of places that do jazz performance that don't actually have classes that are teaching the cultural context.
Well, and what about, you know, this is opening up into jazz and its intersections and relationships to other art forms, you know, to poetry, to painting. I mean, I think about, you know, Romeo Bearden saying, no matter what you were good at, you also had to get with the music. And I think what he meant by that was, you know, a Black artist of his time, there would be no, you'd be ignorant if you didn't get with the music. But I also think it's about a jazz poetics, a jazz visuality, you know, a way in which jazz, certainly speaking as a poet, you know, is the way that we practice manipulating time and moving time in a poem and moving it rhythmically. which is what we're trying to do, and making more than one thing happen at the same time, which is the thing that we're trying to do out of words. So I would love to hear some thoughts from all of you about other art forms talking to jazz.
Oh, and you said making multiple things happen at once. I was actually thinking of this listening to what Farah and Terri were just speaking to, and I feel like what I want to share in response to your question, Elizabeth, is very like in holding hands with what we were just speaking about. I think of this Zora Neale Hurston tale, the telling of John de Conquer. And one of the things that John de Conquer made possible is there were this group of enslaved people who had nowhere, there was nowhere to be out of the eye of the oppressor, right? And I think I'm borrowing that modality of existence in your reality and carrying it over to the modality of existence of like these, first I don't like the word pioneers too much, but these first kind of forebearers, right, of this music, really having no escape from the context of, race-based caste in the United States.
Yep.
And so back to the John de Conquer. So what John de Conquer was able to do is the folks were standing around, and with John de Conquer's influence and magic, they were able to travel to this totally other world. And they were able to see like the far future and the far past and all of these options of what could be possible and what they could look forward to. And they described John de Conquer coming like these wings of a raven that spread from one end of the horizon to the other. But from the perspective of the slave masters on the porch, they were just standing there eating dinner. So it's like this simultaneity of, with this profound spiritual, magical, cultural power, where they were, they could travel in a way that was unreachable, untouchable, even unseeable by their oppressors, but it was viscerally real to them. And I think about, what becomes possible when a Charlie Parker, a Bud Powell are sitting at some uptown venue owned by God knows who cares or may not care about their blackness and their humanity, playing for $5 or whatever, having to go through whatever door, playing this music that for those who know, it becomes a passageway. It becomes a parallel realm. It becomes a limitless sanctuary. And when you both were speaking about, what is known and what is not known, by these students who are coming into the music, I think a lot about, it asks, I feel one of the things it asks is for you to not use it as a power tool. Don't use it as a place to hide. Don't use it as a stepping stone to something else. Like it asks that we actually be so exposed and so very wherever the hell we're at, so very at the mercy of whatever we feel at the mercy of. And from there, utilize that power of the music to create those simultaneous, those parallel dimensions that are as real as whatever you're living in, And I think it's very tempting to use the power in the music to feel like you are self-powered, if that makes sense. Like,
Yes.
because it is so powerful. And
Yes.
I feel like what I'm speaking to is so hard to even speak directly to, but I feel there's something in that Zora Neale Hurston telling of John de Conquer that points to what you're asking about. That at least for my capacity of language is like beyond description.
That's right. That's right. And that, of course, also the lesson in the music that not all questions are to be answered directly. Which demands a very different level of engagement and co-humanism. So thank you for that. Farah, Terri Lyne?
Yeah, I mean, it's about the collective and not the individual. So that's, I think, what Esperanza just said made me really think about that. Because sometimes, I'm wondering what people are playing. And I feel, that they've practiced and they've worked really hard at something and they have this beautiful skill set and toolbox. But I feel like they haven't understood the simple thing of it being about collective work, towards something, a mission. Jazz is a mission-oriented music. And so sometimes I feel like, people have been so isolated trying to learn it that it just comes out as being self-absorbed in some way, and learning these skills to get you to the next place, whatever that means to you. So I think that the collective nature of it is something that we have to constantly reiterate.
Yeah, I think that thank you, Esperanza, for reminding me of that Hurston story. Um, and I think that the writers are always, in some ways trying to put words to paper for what so much of the music accomplishes, right? And you're so right that the people who are huddled there listening to that music in that moment are being transported. Those who know, like if we just follow this musician, and that's Sonny's blues, right? Like his brother doesn't fully get it, but he's there and he sees that these people who have come to hear his brother play the piano is like, if I just follow him, he's going to go somewhere. And if I'm fortunate enough, he's going to take me with him. And I'm going to be transformed. He's going to be transformed, and I'm going to we will be transformed. Right. And there'll be a bunch of people there sitting around talking, drinking, and they won't get it. They're not going to get it, but we're going to get it. And we're going to be taken somewhere as a result of it and transformed in the process. And I think so many of the writers and the painters are part of this community, and then it feeds the art. And I was thinking about Terri Lyne, like I've seen you and Micheline do this incredible project together, working together. And I just saw you recently working with a dancer and a poet, and that there's, where these boundaries between art forms, are blurred because you're in communication with each other to give us something different. You're communicating with each other. And so, Elizabeth, yes, I think that jazz as an art form is one that has also not just with musicians communicating with each other, but with artists using different forms and different genres, also communicating with each other to produce something that's larger than any one form can give us. I mean, the Micheline and Terri Lyne was just incredible.
I want
Thank
to
you,
mention
Farah.
we're very proud and excited. Our Mellon Foundation, we recently launched a $35 million jazz initiative supporting the preservation and study and continued evolution of this art form. And a big component of this initiative is the Jazz Legacies Fellowship, honoring jazz luminaries with unrestricted grants of big grants and an array of, personal and professional supports. And Terri Lyne and Esperanza, we could not have done it without you. You were incredibly crucial, along with some of our other wonderful and treasured musician friends, in shaping what this would look like. So we celebrate that today. And I would like to know from both of you, what does it mean for the jazz community to be receiving this kind of support now? And also, what are some of the things that you're hearing from some of the recipients of their fellowships, and sort of what's the word? We'd love to know.
Well, I've been getting a lot of calls. I know that much. People are like, "How do I get on that list? How do I get nominated? How do I get considered?" So there's definitely a buzz, a very positive buzz around it. But yes, to invest, that kind of money into the art form is so impactful, and to invest into the elders is visionary. Because as far as I know, that's not happened before, not like this. Um, and, we're just so grateful, to Mellon for doing that, and to you, Elizabeth, for making that happen. And, it's interesting because jazz really is about 1.5% of what's consumed in the United States. of the marketplace. And also, well, hip hop is about 33%. So, we are always, in some ways struggling, and so this is, I think has the potential to change things in a way that hopefully other people will see the importance of this art form and want to invest in it as well. Something that I've thought about quite a bit is how, like in a country like France, they have something called unemployment benefits for intermittent workers. And it's addressing like when people have a job or, are an artist and they're not working like all the time, like everybody else in society. So they have unemployment benefits specifically designed for artists, providing a fixed sum for each day without work. And I mean, I think that's incredible. Yeah, I think that's incredible. Yeah, and so we have to like start getting people to, revere jazz, and respect it in a way that the people will make more of an investment in the music and in the artists and all the things surrounding, the artists as well, not just the artists, which is great about what you guys are doing. So I think it's highly
The
impactful.
archival part is really important. The archive, the scholarship, all of the things that can too easily get lost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Esperanza, did you want to add anything?
When Terri Lyne brought those two statistics together of the 1.5 market share of jazz and the 33% market share of hip hop, I'm just thinking it's like a curious metaphor right there for the ways that, the origin, like those first laborers, those spiritual, creative, intellectual laborers, doing that first wave of effort to bring something up, from the yet to be manifest into the world where we can engage with it. And it always kind of feels like that first round of people who do that labor are not acknowledged. But, decades later, when the thing has been grabbed up and, cut up and mixed up and remixed and and then it becomes like a commodity, moves into the realm of commodity. Then when there's like capital moving around it, it's like those folks have probably passed away. You know what I mean? And those two ratios next to each other really highlights that, right? Like hip hop wouldn't exist without these ones, these originators. And behind the scenes, I just think of like, for those young folks in the world who have the luxury within North America, it shouldn't be a luxury, but to have music education, like who are their music teachers? They're jazz musicians for the most part, right? Most in-school music educators have a jazz background. And how they get that background? They had jazz teachers, they had educators, it all kind of trickles back to these, Wayne called people like this the unknowables, right? Whose unacknowledged labor or even just unknown labor is making so much possible to move into the realm of like economic viability. And I feel, you all really pointing your focus back towards these ones that are still among us, whose labor made it possible for all of us to do what we do. Like that is the work, right? And when you talked about the music being a collective work, I think so much about reciprocity, so much about how do we, once we get to a position where we're able to, sustain ourselves with these things that we've developed off of the work of the generations before us, like how do we, in a very practical, embodied, visceral, literal way, engage with reciprocity? And you all as an organization, as an institution, have kind of cracked that code. This is like a first iteration of cracking that code. Like here is a manifest expression of how we give reciprocity to these ones who made it all possible in one way or another. So I thank you. We know it's not going to reach everybody back through time, but I feel at least from this point forward, we have one more model of what it can look like to think in that mindset of reciprocity, to move in that mindset of reciprocity.
Well, I think also, and it's beautiful to hear that. And I think that also what we have right now with some of our elders. I've always been struck with musician friends, the way they talk about, I sat with this one, who sat with that one, who played with that one, who told me this thing, always taking the story all the way back to the beginning, right? But there is a point where I think we can depend on the oral tradition to carry us infinitely, but trying to hold a little bit, trying to make something of that is a very important thing for this musical tradition to happen now with these elders.
Yeah.
And just, picking up on that briefly, and I have two more questions, and then we'll go to some questions from the audience. You touch on, I mean, as James Brown says, is a man's world, right? In some ways in jazz, even though some of the most important innovators and legacy keepers of this music have been women. So, given so much of the work that you all are doing, and this is a question with many pieces to it, but if you could just drop in about, some of the challenges and opportunities women have faced, or, the gendered history of vocalists specifically, who was expected to sing, who was expected to play an instrument, of what you're doing, Terri Lyne, with, with your women, your jazz, your songbook, your American songbook, and looking at songs written by women. Because time is flying, I'm opening up that huge topic, and if you each could just drop in a little bit about it.
Go, Farah.
Well, it has been a project, and thanks to the work of people like Terri Lyne and Esperanza, and our dear friend Jerry Allen, generations of women have been putting lots of attention on the women who came before them, the foremothers, the central role that they have played in this music. Just a reminder that they have been there from the beginning, from the very foundation, and not talking about wanting to add on, not additive, women and jazz, but that there is no jazz history. There is no jazz without the presence of women, and that our understanding of the music has to be, our writing of the music history has to change to represent the presence and the ways that women's voices have always shaped this history. It's always been there. So we're just trying to catch up to give them their due. And I think that, we're finally beginning to do that.
Yeah, and
Okay,
also
Farah,
I
if you
think
could
it's
just say a few
important.
more words also, just a few words about Jerry Allen, because I feel that, we really do, she's making her way into this conversation. So, would just love for you to say a few words.
Yeah, one of our true geniuses, who played in every context, every form of this music, from, and I think I should say every form of Black music. Did not see boundaries between different forms of Black music, and highly accomplished, from straight ahead to avant-garde, just did not see those boundaries at all. And one of the most generous composers and performers I know, always writing with other people in mind, producing with other people in mind, constantly, sometimes too many people, just constantly inviting people to be a part of her projects. I mean, I think we all got to know each other better because of Jerry. And, whether she was playing solo piano, whether she was part of a trio, whether she was part of a big band, just one of the most generous, incredible people I know, and never the lone genius out on her own. And I don't use genius lightly. She was truly that, but never the lone individual striking out on her own, always creating space for more and more voices and honoring the people who came before her. She worked with Betty Carter. She performed Mary Lou Williams music. She just worked with Ornette Coleman. I mean, just you name it, Jerry, just an expansive vision of what this music was. Really extraordinary person.
Esperanza or Terri, was there anything to add?
Yes, I would like to piggyback on what Farah said before about the place of women in jazz, which are three words I don't actually like to put together, women in jazz. And, Farah was talking about how we've always been there. Yet, when I started playing at 10 years old, probably up until I was in my mid-teens, I never saw another woman playing the drums ever. So I had not one role model that was female. And I think what's important now to this conversation, as well as acknowledging the shoulders that we stand on and the people that there's so many people that were there that we don't know about. We don't know who they are. But also listening differently and thinking about the future of the music, and if there's more equity with who's creating the music, both composing and performing, and also throughout the business. But if there's more equity there, like what the potential sound is like, and because jazz, I've been saying a lot lately, jazz is not men's music, yet the sound of it feels very masculine at times. Often it's a part of the fabric of the music to me. And so most of your great female musicians only were acknowledged because they were able to play as good as the next guy. So that was the standard, because those were the people that created the music. So what happens when we stop thinking like that? When we stop thinking that this is the standard and this is how we have to play in order to be respected, in order to be heard. And what happens when it works the other way and people that are listening to the music or teaching the music or playing the music can start to hear a different aesthetic in the music, can start to hear, without, instruments have been gendered and, without hearing the drums a certain way, like I felt like if I didn't, just using myself as an example, I felt like if I didn't bash, I wasn't, even Jerry, we would say that, we would use that word a lot, and she used another word, what did she call it when she put her arms and elbows on the piano? Smash. She would say smash. Can I smash? I was like, yeah, let's smash, But I'm just saying this kind of energy is, what we had to do to be successful. So I'm trying to train myself at this late date to try to hear the music the different, to see what the potential of sound can be like, and to encourage people to do that so that jazz can live up to a different kind of potential. I don't want to say full, I normally say to its full potential. I think, some people may not like that because they're saying, well, what's wrong with it as it is? But I do feel that there's, more potential than what we've heard.
Absolutely.
Esperanza, did you want to add anything?
Just gratitude about Jerry, just gratitude to you, Terri, for having that vision to create the ACS trio. When so many of the things that I heard Farah say about Jerry apply to you, Terri, of the way your expansive, inclusive thinking. I see you always with this vast map of who's out there, like who's out there coming up, who's been out there, who we're not thinking about as often, who's getting lost on the radar. And I see you always weaving these new constellations, to connect these points across time and space in the music. And in that practice you're so great at, you brought me into the fold with you and Jerry, and we got to have those amazing years with her. And I learned from her about just what you're saying. That was the first time I saw a woman in the music who wasn't attempting to present as anything other than herself. She had a very gentle, tender, motherly, soft persona, and she allowed herself to be that way. It's like she wasn't fighting. You know what I mean? She's like, this is just how I am. And that was so healing to be in her company and to feel her in all her baddiness, just with a different valence of power, So I really just want to acknowledge you in all those ways you do that and give thanks to you for bringing me into her fold.
Oh, thank
Yeah,
you.
Terri Lyne does it in ways that like people don't even know.
Mm-hmm.
Like people are going to be learning about. There's going to be a generation of young musicians sitting at a thing like this,
Mm-hmm.
talking about the fact that they are who they are because of what Terri Lyne made possible for them.
Mm.
You guys are too kind.
Beautiful.
Mm-mm.
You're just
No,
telling the truth.
Beautiful.
just tell us that is the facts.
Yes.
So there are so many questions. My head is spinning. So I'm gonna take my eyes off this for a minute. Usually I can kind of look over a little bit and find, but now I have to look straight at this. So I'm gonna throw out a few questions because people have been so engaged. And
I did want to say that guitarist is
yes,
Barney Cass. Yes. So you were right. It's
thank you.
Barney. Give him his props.
Thank
Yes.
you. And I'll throw out a couple questions and just take whatever piece you want and throw something out so we can do as much as possible. Question from Roanoke, Virginia. If you could completely redesign how jazz is presented to the world, festivals, recordings, performances, what would you change? So that's one question that's out there. Then here's another question. What is, this question is from St. Louis, Missouri. What is or might be jazz's relationship to democracy? What can jazz or jazz musicians teach us about imagining and creating a better world? So I'll just leave those two questions out there. Jazz and democracy and ways to present jazz.
Well, I think, there's a lot that's been said about jazz and democracy, a lot that's been
Yes.
written about jazz and democracy, and about creating a better world. I mean, I think jazz has modeled a way of being in the world. You know, the jazz and democracy piece that people have talked about over and over again is how to exist in a collective, how to exist in a community, while celebrating the individual, allowing the individual a space to speak, freedom of expression, but always coming back to the collective, right? Always moving forward as a community project, and not having freedom for, at the expense of the well-being of a communal project, and also freedom to, resist, to protest, to stand strong in one's ability to say no when things are repressive. And so I think that, how to live together without squashing one's voice, telling one's story. There's multiple. I think more has probably been written about jazz modeling a democratic way of being than almost anything else about the music. So we'll see, Yeah, go ahead, Terri Lyne.
I hear you, and I hear that conversation loud and clear, but it still makes me feel like it's not. I mean, there's without parity, it's democracy in theory, but it hasn't actually really happened.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like in the music, and I think everybody kind of gives jazz that credit, and I think it definitely shows us what's possible. But women's voices were not really in the picture, so we speak about it because I think we're seeing the potential of the art form. It's like people seeing the potential in communism, only if it's done a certain way, right? So it's kind of like the same thing to me, with jazz. We give the credit to jazz for doing these things that it hasn't quite done yet, but it has modeled how to.
Yeah.
So I just, whenever that conversation comes up, it makes me a little edgy because I feel left out.
I think that's probably true of all theories of democracy, right? I mean, we could say that we're on edge about American democracy right now. And it's a democracy, it's the promise of democracy. It's the promise of democracy that we struggle for and fight for, but have never fully realized.
Mhm. And what about who'd like to say
Exactly.
something about envisioning ways of presenting jazz, of having jazz reach people?
I mean, I'll start, and I'm sure you guys will have some other thoughts. I have a radio show on Sirius XM called Future Flavors, and focused on, kind of new jazz, or what's happening, in jazz today that's uh, kind of on the forefront of pushing the music forward. Um, and so much of jazz is classic jazz. And like if you're my dad, you're thinking what I play on the radio is not jazz. He doesn't know what it is. And but I think we can't keep, the music has always been a continuum. So I think we can't keep going back. We have to recognize, classic jazz as what it is, and there's nothing wrong with playing it. But I think we have to continually make space for the expansive nature of the music, and that's not easy. It's kind of beyond a certain kind of beat that's recognized as swing, or a certain kind of playing in rhythm, a certain kind of time feel, or certain kinds of ways of approaching, where you can literally hear the continuum from bebop till now, which is important. But I do feel like we have to really make space for how the music that people have grown up with influences how they create their jazz. And sometimes that doesn't feel like there's enough space for that. And I do feel that that's one of the things that will maybe make that 1.5% number a little higher, if we can keep, and using technology. We're still using the same technology, as far as classic jazz, traditional jazz, whatever you want to call it, even modern jazz that's acoustic. I mean, it's still using the same technology that was used kind of in the inception of the music. So how do we start thinking more expansively about how we create it, and who we want to engage with it? So anyway, as far as festivals and all that, yeah, I think it's everything. As I said the first time, jazz is expensive. So these festivals, yeah, they need to make sure that they're acknowledging, all the. That's why when you go to someplace like North Sea, you'll see, classic jazz, you'll see, modern stuff. And then there's a whole other problem with people that have nothing to do with jazz at all, at jazz festivals. I won't say that's a problem, because they probably pay the bills for the jazz musicians that are playing in the smaller rooms. But I do feel like we have to let go sometimes of what we think something is in order to embrace where it's going.
And I'm glad you mentioned Sirius, but just the radio, and just the radio as a place that certainly so many of us learned so much coming along, right? And that still is a way that that we can become immersed in things that we might not have a chance to see live for a long time, or in some cases ever. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
I also,
Please.
a lot of people said, you know, we were doing the Hazel Scott documentary, and a lot of
Yes.
younger artists said that they had never heard of Hazel Scott, and what introduced them to Hazel Scott was a segment on the Grammys when Alicia Keys honored Hazel Scott by playing the two pianos. And so many people were like, oh my God, who was she? And then they went to YouTube. And it made me think, if the number of younger artists, younger popular artists, or just popular artists, not even younger popular artists, who could introduce young audiences to the music, not just through introducing them to classic jazz figures, but through talking about the ways that the music informs their own music making would be fascinating. I mean, I know that Kendrick listens to the music, but just the kinds of conversations between young artists, young popular pop music artists or whatever, and how they engage, if they engage, not classic jazz, but their own contemporaries,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Mhm.
their own contemporaries who are playing music right now today. What kinds of conversations are happening, if at all, or what might be exciting about those conversations would be fascinating. I would love to. I mean, talking about presenting ways of presenting the
Mhm.
music, great ways of presenting the music.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you mentioned Kendrick, who, of course, is part of that whole LA Alice Coltrane lineage, thing. It would be amazing to see. That's our first like shout out into the universe. Is we would love to hear more about that. Yeah. So we're at time, and of course, also what everybody wants to know is they want recommendations, which I know are always so hard because there's so many things. So I will consolidate all of the "What do you recommend?" We listen to questions into a part two of the listening that we just did. So tell us about a piece of music that today or recently blew your mind that you wanna encourage people to listen to. And we could start with Esperanza.
I've been listening to the More Mothers record. I think it's called Jazz Codes. That to me feels like you said something earlier about Farah. You said stand on the past and create a future where there appears to be none.
Yeah.
I feel that from More Mother and the Irreversible Entanglements crew and the crew on this record deeply. I would recommend that.
I would
Thank you.
recommend Terri Lyne Carrington's New Standards and the Mosaic Project.
Yes.
My
Oh,
recommendation.
thank you, Sarah. Oh, goodness. That's the hardest question in the
It's always the
world.
hardest
'Cause
question. I know. I know.
uh, I mean, I start thinking about desert island, and if I were on a desert island, like what would I want to have there? And do I get one record on a desert island, or do I get two, or do I get five? Um, anything by Roy Haynes, I want to listen to because I can never
Mhm.
get enough of Roy Haynes.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mhm.
I think, my Desert Island classic, which if this is a jazz audience at all, they already know this album because it is such a classic album. But if you haven't heard it for whatever reason, check it out. But it's the Johnny Hartman and John Coltrane album
Oh,
because
yes.
that just soothes me.
Mm-hmm.
It soothes me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mm. I'm going to ask myself, Elizabeth, and what about you? And I would say the audience and Betty Carter. I want Betty Carter to come into the conversation
Ooh.
because thinking about, what was being said earlier about Alice Coltrane and thinking about a Black woman being her full self in all the colors. Talking to us when I listen to anything by Betty Carter, and when I listen to that album all the way through in particular, in the glory of a double album, when we had the actual
Mm-hmm.
physical double albums, I feel like a Black woman is telling me who she is and how she's moving through this life and in the truest voice possible. And that never gets old for me.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
amazing and beautiful and radiant women carrying so much forward for us, giving so much to each other and to all the people who are listening. We had over 6,000 people register for this conversation.
Wow.
So what you have given is out there. I truly wish that this conversation could go for hours and hours. May it continue in this life and to just remind us of the freedom that you all talk about and the freedom that this Black music carries, those freedom dreams, that freedom manifestation, that freedom aspiration, music of such virtuosity and speed and skill that it can outrun the devil. Thank you for being in that with us today. Heart is full. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Elizabeth.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having
Thank
us.
you. And to everyone listening, thank you. And we will see you the next time. Good afternoon.
Mhm.